What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Teval the Balanced Scale. Teval is a 4/4 Spirit Dragon for 1 black green blue that has flying. Whenever Teval attacks, mill 3 and return a land card from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 zombie druid token. There's a few different ways that Teval can be built. Self-mill, landfall, graveyard exile. For this deck tech, we'll include a little bit of all of that, but with a more pronounced and unique theme, Flashback. Flashback is a mechanic that lets you cast an instant or sorcery from your graveyard before exiling it. Since casting it with its flashback effect will make it leave the graveyard, it'll trigger Teval's ability, netting you a zombie token in the process. While we'll be primarily focusing on flashback effects, we'll still have some self-mill and graveyard exile, in order to maximize Teval's abilities. With that, let's get into the card highlights. Flashback cards come in many different flavors. To start out with, we'll look at some that synergize very well with Teval's own ability of making creature tokens. Chatter of the Squirrel and Acorn Harvest are two such examples, with both creating 1/1 squirrel creature tokens on resolution. Grisly Fate makes 2 2/2 bears, with the added benefit of making 4 bears instead if threshold is met. Since we're a deck all about getting cards into the graveyard, having 7 or more cards in the graveyard should be easily attainable. We also have Beast Attack and Call of the Herd, which give us a 4/4 Beast and 3/3 Elephant respectively. While Beast Attack is a bit on the expensive side, especially for only netting us 1 token, it is an instant, meaning we can use it as a nice combat trick on an opponent's turn to get a 4/4 and potentially a 2/2 if Teval is out and its flashback ability is used. There are also some cards with flashback that fit into the theme of filling our graveyard via mill. Chill of Foreboding is one such effect, making every person mill 5 cards, which is likely to be advantageous to us more so than our opponents. Dream Twist lets you mill yourself for 3, or an opponent instead if the situation calls for it. Otherworldly Gaze is more like selective mill, since it surveils 3 cards, meaning we can chuck specific cards to our graveyard only when we absolutely want to. Alongside mill, we also have a few draw effects, giving us some nice card advantage that can be repeated from the graveyard. Deep Analysis and Eviscerator's Insight both net us 2 cards, even though the Insight requires us to sacrifice a creature or artifact to do so. This shouldn't be too big of a deal, since Teval will be making us creature tokens we can use as fodder. Instead of drawing 2, Scour All Possibilities scries 2 and draws a single card, which in some cases can be more advantageous since it lets us more carefully craft our draw. Some cards can act as double whammies in Teval, letting us use flashback and remove other cards from our graveyard, all from one source. Memory's Journey and Turn the Earth let us shuffle up to 3 cards from our graveyard into our library. If cast from the graveyard, this will trigger Teval's zombie creation ability twice. Once for the card itself leaving the graveyard due to flashback, and then another time for it resolving and shuffling 1 to 3 cards into the library. On the flip side, we also have cards that will exile other cards from our graveyard. Coffin Purge and Rotten Reunion both have flashback, and both let us exile a single card from our graveyard, with the Reunion even netting us another zombie token in the process, albeit with Decayed. The best part about these cards is that they also let us exile cards from our opponent's graveyards at instant speed. This can be a great way to prevent someone from reanimating a creature from their graveyard, all for a single mana. For flashback cards that just act as good utility, we have Deep Reconnaissance, which can act as relatively effective, albeit expensive, land ramp, Moment's Peace, which is a nice fog effect that can be used twice, and Mass Diminish, which can turn a giant opposing army into a significantly smaller one. These are all effects that can be useful in most games at one point or another, so they're good to have in our back pocket. Beyond the flashback cards, we also have cards that can self-mill. This can be doubly effective for us, as not only can this be a good way to get lands into the graveyard for Teval's attack ability, it also can get the flashback cards into our graveyard without having to first cast them. The main goal is to cast our instants and sorceries from the graveyard, so we really don't care about how they get there in the first place. For that, we have Stitcher Supplier, Satyr Wayfinder, and Grisly Salvage, which can mill us for 3, 4, and 5 cards respectively. The Wayfinder and Salvage do let us get a land and or creature from among the cards milled, but it is a may. If you'd rather shove them all into the graveyard, even if there are legal cards to return to your hand, you can do so. Aftermath Analyst and Grapple with the Past both mill us 3 cards upon resolution. Grapple is similar to Grisly Salvage, as it can return a creature and or land back, but unlike that card, it doesn't have to be from among the milled. It can return any land or creature. This can be useful if, for example, a creature you need died previously, or if you used a sack land earlier in the game. Speaking of sacrificing, Aftermath Analyst will turn into a splendid reclamation by doing so, getting you all lands from your graveyard onto the battlefield. Since we have a mill sub-theme, this can be an excellent way to ramp hard and get a ton of lands out in one fell swoop. Since we'll be milling cards that may not be lands or have flashback, we also have a number of effects that can exile cards from our graveyard to trigger Teval's second ability. Relic of Progenitus and Ghost Vacuum both tap to exile a card from a graveyard. Again, not only our graveyard, but it can be from an opponent's as well, though Relic does let them choose what card to exile. The Ghost Vacuum sacrifice effect can even be a great way to build your own Rise of the Dark Realms, or just get a few of your opponent's best creatures out on your side of the field. Withered Wretch is probably going to be the best card in any Teval deck, as it lets you exile a card from a graveyard for the low cost of 1 mana. Since each activation is separate, this basically says pay 1, exile a card from your graveyard, make a 2/2 zombie when paired with Teval, giving you an extremely cost-effective combination. There are also cards that basically act as mana dorks when exiling cards from the graveyard, with both Deathrite Shaman and Molt Tender letting you generate a mana for exiling a card. The Shaman not only gives you mana, but can also gain you life or make your opponents lose life, depending on what card is exiled. And again, it can exile from any graveyard, making it an effective way to stop any opponent's graveyard shenanigans. The Tender is specific to your graveyard, but also lets you mill a card, giving us another potential way to get flashback cards into the graveyard. Instead of exiling, we can also return cards from our graveyard to trigger Teval's second ability. Eternal Witness and Noxious Revival both return a card from our graveyard, with the former returning it to our hand, and the latter putting it on top of our library. There's also Gravecrawler, which can be cast from the graveyard as long as we control a zombie, which shouldn't be too hard since Teval makes zombie tokens. Admittedly, Gravecrawler is more efficient when paired with a sacrifice outlet, but since we don't have that, we'll have to rely on it being blocked by our opponents in combat to die. And hey, if they don't want to kill Gravecrawler since we can likely recast it and make a token, they'll end up taking 2 to the face, which is still good in my book. Alongside Flashback, there's another mechanic that works well with Teval's ability, and that's Delve. For this mechanic, we'll focus on 2 very good card draw spells that can be made cheaper by exiling cards from the graveyard to help pay for them. Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise can both be cast for as cheap as 2 and 1 mana respectively, if Delve is used to its full potential. Unfortunately, each card exiled with Delve is considered to happen all at once, so we'll only ever get 1 Teval trigger out of these, no matter how many cards are delved away. Still, even 1 trigger is good, especially when getting some nice card advantage in the process. Finally, we have some good utility cards that work solely with Flashback. Quiet Speculation is a tutor spell for cards specifically that have Flashback. Not only does it get you up to 3 cards, they are immediately put into the graveyard, meaning you'll be able to get Teval triggers that much quicker. Runic Repetition lets you get your best Flashback card out of exile and into your hand, letting you cast it another 2 times in the game. Catalyst Stone is going to be pretty much the best card in the deck, as it reduces the cost of Flashback on your spells by 2 generic mana. As you could probably tell from earlier in this video, Flashback costs can be pretty hefty, especially on older, less power-crept cards. This reducing all of their costs by 2 mana is going to make it so much easier and efficient to cast these spells the second time around. Here's an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Additional cards include more Flashback spells like Artful Dodge and Think Twice, ramp spells that can get lands into the graveyard like Harrow and Crop Rotation, and lands that they themselves specifically have sacrifice effects like Demolition Field and Evolving Wilds. While this deck focuses more so on Teval's second ability, I wanted to make sure that the deck had enough ways to really capitalize on the attack ability as well. I think this is a fun and unique way to make a Teval the balanced scale deck. Sure, this list could have been 100 cards of pure self-mill and graveyard exile, or ways to make Gravecrawler go infinite to make infinite tokens, but that's just not that interesting to me. I wanted something unique, something that stands out, but still works well enough in a casual game. Flashback, in my opinion, fits that perfectly. Flashback is such an interesting and underutilized mechanic that just so happens to fit with Teval's abilities flawlessly. Yes, it's not the strongest mechanic. This can be seen in the fact that many Flashback costs are extremely overcosted, especially on the older cards. I mean, come on, does Deep Reconnaissance really have to cost 5 mana to Flashback? That's just a byproduct of the time it and many of these other cards were printed, especially compared with the kind of cards that are coming out nowadays. That doesn't mean that the theme doesn't work, however. I strongly believe that synergy can trump ineffective or overcosted cards, and Flashback mixed with Teval is an extremely synergistic combo. There's just one card that you need to watch out for with this deck, and that's Tombfire. Oh boy, watch out for that Tombfire. It'll be crazy bad if that's cast. I'm just playing. No one actually plays that card, but it would be bad if they did so. And honestly, if you use this deck in your play group and someone starts to put Tombfire in their deck to metagame against you, I'd consider that a win all day. If this sounds like something you're interested in, either using a unique mechanic with the commander, or trying to get your friends to start putting Tombfire in their decks just to stop you, then this Teval build may be right up your alley. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Teval the Balanced Scale. The full deck list outlined in this video can be found at the Architect link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.